Your chest is a seismograph. Every room becomes a storm you forecast with your ribs. You already know the ache of giving too much, of entering spaces where your nervous system reads every subtle shift like weather radar. This is not softness. It is survival learned long ago. You feel the moods of others before they arrive. You bend yourself into shapes that make others comfortable, believing that if you hold still enough, if you shine brightly enough, harmony will finally come. And yet, you have noticed, harmony does not arrive. You give, and still you are left hollow. Pause here. Breathe. Notice the exhaustion. It is not a flaw in you, nor evidence that you failed as a healer. It is the natural consequence of carrying everyone else's storms inside your chest. You thought endurance was virtue. Truth is, it was camouflage for fear. The fear that if you stopped giving, you would be abandoned. That fear has tied you to a pattern older than you can name. Now, imagine that what you call empath and narcissist are not only people but living archetypes, masks of the psyche playing out a myth much older than you. To see them as mere labels is to skim the surface of a deep ocean. To descend is to step into symbol and story, into the eternal language of the unconscious. Here, the empath does not just overfeel. The empath becomes the light bearer, carrying the flame of compassion. And the narcissist does not merely wound. The narcissist becomes the mask of shadow, the dragon at the gate of your own treasure. Do not mistake me. This is not about sanctifying cruelty. The wounds are real, the scars undeniable. Meaning is not moral permission. But even within the darkest encounter, the psyche arranges a mirror. The narcissist becomes that mirror, distorted and painful, but still reflecting what you would not otherwise face. Your silence before your own needs, your hunger for validation, your unconscious compulsion to give away power. This reversal of perspective is thunder across the soul. It does not deny the cruelty, but it reveals an alchemy no gentle teacher could deliver. The narcissist demands attention, submission, adoration. And yet, in resisting them, you encounter the part of you that has long abandoned yourself. The treasure they take is the one you left unguarded. Until you integrate this abandoned self, the narcissist will return again and again, like a prophet cloaked in darkness. Dreams whisper this lesson before you can accept it. A face with no features chasing you, jewels handed over to strangers, a mirror cracking under your hand. These are not mere fantasies. They are messages from the unconscious. Return what is yours. The very psyche refuses to let you remain only a victim. It insists you see that empathy without shadow becomes self-erasure. Compassion without boundaries collapses into sacrifice. Love without strength burns itself out. In this light, the narcissist emerges as a paradox, tormentor and teacher. Not because they intended to teach, but because yourself, the deeper architect of the psyche, used them as an alchemical crucible. Prima materia, the raw, chaotic matter needed for gold to be forged. The narcissist becomes that chaos, consuming and inflated, and yet in the struggle, something inside you crystallizes. You begin to see that your empathy was never meant to be endless giving. It was meant to be love rooted in discernment. You realize that compassion without self-respect is not compassion at all, but another mask of control. Archetypally, this is the descent of Persephone, dragged into the underworld, devoured by Hades. Against her will, she enters shadow. But through the descent, she becomes queen, sovereign of both realms. So too with you. Pulled into manipulation, you discover boundaries. Confronted by the devouring other, you reclaim your voice. Facing the dragon, you discover that the fire of discernment was yours all along. This realization is never gentle. The ego resists, preferring the safety of victimhood, the clarity of blame. But the soul hungers for truth. And the truth is this: you were not powerless. You were being shown yourself. Every narcissist becomes a mirror. Yes, distorted, painful, but still a mirror. They reveal where you confused endurance with love, sacrifice with healing, empathy with possession by another's needs, and so the empath awakens. Not as someone who must forever bleed for others, but as someone who discerns, who protects, who honors the sacredness of their own soul. The empath ceases to vanish in the reflection of the other. The mirror cracks, and for the first time, you see your own face. If you're hearing this now, pause and reflect. Ask yourself, what storms have I carried that were never mine? Where have I mistaken endurance for love? Share your thoughts below. Tell me where you are listening from, what time it is as you hear this. Your reflections matter, because this channel, Carl Jung Stories Unveiled, is not just storytelling. It's a circle of shared awakening. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. The journey is long, and you will not want to miss the next turn of the path. Already we have named the ache and glimpsed the mirror. We have seen that beneath suffering lies initiation, that even torment carries paradoxical teaching. And as the mirror cracks, the psyche offers images, dreams, symbols, synchronicities that reveal the lesson in plain sight. This is where we turn next, to the dream signs that whisper the boundary lesson waiting in the dark. The unconscious has its own voice. It does not speak in paragraphs or lectures, but in images that come at night, in dreams, or in coincidences that pierce the veil of ordinary life. These are the places where the psyche insists on being heard. When the empath is entangled with the narcissist, dreams often become vivid, haunted by symbols that, when seen clearly, carry the essence of the lesson. You may dream of being chased by a figure with no face. This faceless pursuer is not random. It is the embodiment of your own disowned will, the part of you that you do not allow to speak in waking life. You hand your voice away, you silence your own needs, and so the unconscious chases you with the very thing you abandoned. You may dream of giving away jewels to strangers. Those jewels are your time, your attention, your life force, the treasures of your soul. The dream shouts, you are giving away what you do not need to give. Or perhaps you stand before a mirror that cracks when you touch it. This shattering is the image of an identity fractured by over-identification with the needs of the other. The psyche dramatizes what you resist acknowledging in daylight. Synchronicities also rise. Those uncanny alignments where external events seem to echo your inner world. The narcissist texts you just as you think you have finally broken free. A line from a book falls open. Guard your treasure. A song repeats. No more sacrifice. These are not accidents, but the psyche's way of demanding you pay attention. What is the teaching? That compassion without discernment is not compassion. That love without boundaries collapses into martyrdom. That empathy without shadow becomes possession by others' hunger. For years, you may have thought, if I give enough, if I love enough, they will change. The unconscious replies, no. To give endlessly is not to love. It is to erase yourself. The narcissist plays the role of thief, but the treasure they take is only what you left unguarded. The teaching is sharp. Guard your soul, say no. Recognize that boundaries are not walls of cruelty, but altars of respect. Boundaries are the shape of love when love matures. Love without strength is sentimentality. Strength without love is tyranny. Boundaries unite the two. Compassion with spine. This realization is not easy. At first, every no feels like betrayal of your nature. To refuse to bend feels cruel. To demand reciprocity feels selfish. But selfishness is not the same as selfhood. You are not betraying your empathy. You are rescuing it from unconscious compulsion. You are learning that empathy must flow both ways. Toward others, yes, but also toward yourself. Without that balance, empathy becomes addiction, a need to be needed, a subtle pride in being the savior. The narcissist exposes this illusion mercilessly. They devour all you give until nothing remains. They are the abyss into which unconscious empathy falls. By embodying this abyss, they force you to see that true healing never comes from your self-destruction. Healing arises when you give from fullness, not emptiness. When you give without abandoning yourself. Notice how the psyche works here. You might feel outrage at the narcissist's endless hunger. Yet that outrage, if you follow it, leads to clarity. You see your own pattern, the silence before your needs, the compulsion to please, the belief that love must equal sacrifice. The narcissist becomes the mirror of your shadow, showing you the cost of erasing yourself. This is why the unconscious keeps repeating the dream of pursuit, the dream of loss, the dream of shattering. It refuses to let you ignore the truth. It insists that you reclaim what is yours. The voice in the cavern whispers, "Return what is yours." The cracked mirror is not an ending, but an invitation. See your own face. And so, in the middle of exhaustion, a strange seed is planted. You begin to wonder, what if love does not require my erasure? What if compassion grows stronger when it is rooted in self-respect? What if saying no is not cruelty, but the highest form of honesty? These questions stir the soul. They are the beginnings of boundaries. Think of boundaries not as lines of stone, but as living rivers. They shape the land. They give contour to the terrain. Without the riverbank, water floods and destroys. With banks, the river flows, nourishing everything around it. Your empathy is the river. Boundaries are the banks. Without them, you drown. With them, you flow. At this point, pause with me. Ask yourself, where in your life are the banks missing? Where have you allowed your river to flood into someone else's emptiness, believing it was love? Comment below. Share a moment when you realized a no was the deepest yes to your own soul. These stories, when shared, become mirrors for others on the path. And if this reflection resonates, subscribe to Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled, so these archetypal currents continue to reach you at the right moment. The teaching of dreams and synchronicities is clear. Reclaim your jewels, guard your soul, let love have a backbone. The empath who learns this is no longer consumed. They are initiated. They cross a threshold from endless giving to conscious choosing. And yet, this initiation is only the beginning. Once the seed of boundary is planted, the alchemical work begins. For boundaries are not merely psychological, they are the crucible where empathy is tempered into strength. In the next movement, we descend into the fire itself, where narcissist and empath meet as mythic adversaries, and through the heat, gold is forged. Alchemy never begins in calm waters. It begins in the furnace. The encounter with the narcissist is precisely this furnace, the prima materia, the raw chaos that consumes until it is transformed. To the conscious mind, it feels like torment, endless demands, manipulation, hunger that devours every gift you place on the altar. To the deeper psyche, it is initiation. The narcissist is not a gentle teacher, but a dragon stationed at the gate of your treasure. Their fire is not enlightenment, but in resisting it, you discover the substance of your own courage. This is the paradox of myth. The adversary exists not to bless you, but to test you. In ancient stories, the hero never encounters a kindly guide at the threshold of the cave. They meet monsters, tricksters, consuming gods. So too in your life. The narcissist stands as the consuming figure, the devouring mother, the tyrannical father, the trickster who demands every ounce of your attention. They appear as the abyss itself, swallowing without end. And yet, in meeting them, something inside you begins to crystallize. The alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of decomposition, when all structures collapse into chaos. The empath's entanglement with the narcissist is this nigredo. Your identity crumbles. The roles you thought you were playing, the healer, the giver, the one who saves, burn away. What remains is raw material, stripped of illusions. It feels like annihilation, but alchemy insists. Only through this collapse can the gold be made. Look closely at the demands of the narcissist. Their insistence on adoration, their endless appetite. These reveal not just their void, but your pattern of self-erasure. Each time you say yes against your own needs, you place another jewel on their altar. Each time you silence your no, you feed the abyss. The lesson is brutal. The dragon breathes fire until you discover that you are capable of fire as well. Boundaries forged in this crucible are not intellectual. They are visceral. The first no shakes your body like thunder. Your hands tremble, your voice quivers. It feels like betrayal, like cruelty. But as the fire burns, a new element emerges: discernment. You begin to feel the difference between compassion that flows freely and sacrifice that corrodes your soul. The narcissist becomes the unwilling initiator, the figure who, by devouring, forces you to taste your own sovereignty. Consider the myth of St. George and the dragon. The village sacrifices endlessly to the beast, feeding it sheep, then children. But the monster's hunger never ends. Only when the hero arrives and confronts the dragon directly is the cycle broken. This story is not about violence. It is about refusing to sacrifice what is sacred. The empath, too, must stop feeding the abyss. To confront the narcissist is to refuse the cycle of sacrifice. It is to recognize that endless giving does not appease hunger. It only deepens it. This confrontation often feels like death, and in a sense it is. The death of the false self that believed love meant annihilation. When the empath stands before the narcissist and finally says, "Enough," they kill the old script. They no longer agree to be the endless well. They no longer confuse endurance with virtue. In that moment, a new self is born. One who knows that love requires strength, that compassion requires self-respect. The narcissist's role here is paradoxical. They never intend to teach, but by embodying shadow so fully, they force the empath to discover their own light with spine. They are the prima materia, chaotic and consuming, and in struggling with them, the empath discovers gold. Empathy that flows with boundaries, compassion that does not collapse into martyrdom. You might ask, why must the lesson be so harsh? Why could the psyche not send a gentle teacher? But initiation is rarely gentle. It is the underworld path, the descent into shadow, the burning away of illusions. The narcissist embodies the extreme opposite of the empath's self-erasure, and in that polarity, balance becomes visible. Without such an adversary, the empath might never see the hidden danger of their own archetype. Think of it this way: the narcissist inflates the ego until it swallows everything. The empath dissolves the ego until nothing of themselves remains. These are two ends of one archetypal spectrum. To meet each other is to collide in extremes. The collision is painful, yes, but it forces the empath to find the middle path. Not inflation, not erasure, but wholeness. So, when you remember your own encounters, notice how the very fire that burned you also revealed your mettle. Perhaps you discovered you could say no and survive. Perhaps you realized that love without strength is not love at all. Perhaps you found that compassion could be fierce, that tenderness could be rooted. These realizations are the alchemical gold, won only through the furnace of pain. Pause with me now. Ask yourself, where have you mistaken sacrifice for compassion? Where have you fed the dragon, believing it would soften if you just gave more? Write it down. Share it below if you wish. These reflections become part of the collective story, and in speaking them, you help another see their own fire. And if this resonates, make sure you subscribe to Carl Jung Stories Unveiled, because the path through shadow is not meant to be walked alone. The lesson of the furnace is this: empathy is not endless giving. It is love with a backbone. It is compassion with discernment. It is the river flowing within its banks. The narcissist, in all their consuming demand, becomes the crucible through which this truth is born. From here we turn deeper still. For the narcissist is not only the dragon at the gate, they are also the echo of something much older. Beneath the adult entanglement lies the childhood wound, the first place where love was conditional, where selfhood was bartered for belonging. To understand why the empath keeps repeating the sacrifice, we must descend into those earliest roots. Every pattern we repeat in adulthood carries the echo of childhood. To understand why the empath endures the narcissist, we must descend into those earliest rooms where love first carried conditions. The story does not begin with the partner, the colleague, or the friend who consumed your giving. It begins with the parent who could not see you unless you performed, unless you pleased, unless you abandoned some vital fragment of yourself. Picture the child standing in the living room, small hands reaching for recognition. A father whose affection came only when obedience was perfect. A mother whose gaze softened only when sacrifice was offered. The lesson learned in those rooms was clear. To be loved, you must erase yourself. To belong, you must hand over your treasure. This is the root. And the narcissist who arrives later in life is only the echo, the reenactment, the psyche's attempt to bring the wound into consciousness. You may tell yourself, I chose wrong. I should have known better. But the truth is deeper. The psyche orchestrates these encounters with ruthless precision. It repeats the drama not to punish you, but to awaken you. What was unconscious must become conscious. The parent who could not complete the lesson left the wound unfinished. The narcissist arrives as the uninvited teacher who carries the missing piece. This is why the pain feels so familiar, why the ache is so ancient. When the narcissist demands your endless giving, the child within you hears the old command: be good, be quiet, be useful. Then maybe you will be loved. And so, without realizing, you comply. You repeat the sacrifice you learned to survive. But here is the turning point. You are no longer that child. You are not trapped in those rooms anymore. The empath who begins to see the pattern discovers that the repetition was never about the narcissist alone. It was about the unfinished story of their own childhood. To confront the narcissist is to confront the wound's origin. To say no to them is to say no, finally, to the belief that your existence must be purchased with self-erasure. In analysis rooms, I have seen this moment again and again. A patient describes years of devotion to someone who never gave back. Their voice cracks with grief. "Why did I stay?" they ask. And then, slowly, the dreams reveal the truth. The face of a parent hidden in the narcissist's shadow. The same hunger for approval. The same ache for recognition. The narcissist was never just the narcissist. They were the archetypal echo of the first wound. When this recognition dawns, everything shifts. The empath sees that their suffering was not meaningless. It was not deserved, not justified, but it was meaningful. It was an initiation into selfhood. The wound becomes visible, and with visibility comes freedom. For you cannot heal what you do not face. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see. This is the deeper work of individuation. To realize that the people who wound us most deeply are often carriers of the archetypal task we must confront. They are not to be excused, nor glorified, but they cannot be dismissed as meaningless. If life is guided by the self, then even the darkest encounters are woven into the fabric of your growth. You may resist this truth. The ego prefers blame, the purity of victimhood. But the soul hungers for something more profound, the recognition that even pain can be initiation. To see this does not mean returning to the narcissist. It does not mean tolerating abuse. It means claiming the wisdom that your own psyche carved into your life. It means seeing the child who first learned to self-erase and choosing to protect them now. Imagine that child again, standing with empty hands, waiting to be noticed. This time, you step into the room as your adult self. You bend down and meet their eyes. You say, "You do not need to vanish to be loved. You do not need to perform to belong. You are enough." This act of reparenting is the reversal of the old spell. It breaks the repetition. Notice what happens when you begin to practice this truth in your relationships. The narcissist's demands no longer hold the same power. You see them for what they are. Echoes, not destiny. You may still feel sadness, even compassion, but you are no longer possessed by the dynamic. You reclaim your projection, and the energy bound to the old wound is freed. Pause here and ask yourself, where in your childhood did you first learn that love had a price? Where did you first trade your truth for approval? Write it down. Share if you feel ready. These stories, spoken aloud, loosen the hold of silence. And remember, subscribe to Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled, because each story we unfold together is another mirror offered back to you. This is the pivot point. By tracing the root, you step onto the path of individuation. You begin to separate from unconscious repetition. You recognize that the wound was real, but it does not need to dictate your future. You understand that sovereignty does not erase the past, but it transforms its power. From here, the journey turns toward the clash itself, the collision of opposites, the death of the false self, the descent into shadow that ends in rebirth. This is where the archetypal spectrum reveals its extremes, and where the empath begins to reclaim their wholeness through the crucible of death and return. The clash between empath and narcissist is never mild. It is the collision of opposites. On one side, the narcissist swollen with inflation, feeding endlessly on reflection, terrified of collapse. On the other, the empath dissolving into self-erasure, offering themselves in fragments to sustain the bond. Inflation meets erasure. Devourer meets sacrificer. The psyche stages this confrontation so that what is hidden becomes visible. And in this visibility, death and rebirth begin. It feels, at first, like annihilation. The empath believes that to stop giving is to stop existing. The first no burns like betrayal of their own soul. Yet in truth, what dies here is not the soul, but the false self. The mask built on the belief that love requires self-annihilation. This is the psychic death Jung called necessary. The collapse of what was never truly you. Myth gives us mirrors for this moment. Persephone, torn from the surface world, dragged into the underworld against her will. In the darkness, she despairs, consumed by Hades, stripped of innocence. But through descent, she becomes sovereign of two realms, queen of both the living and the dead. The empath's descent into the narcissist's domain is the same. Pulled into manipulation, into hunger without end, you feel devoured. But if you endure, if you awaken, you emerge not as victim, but as sovereign. Consider also the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. The empath without boundaries is consumed by their own gift, circling endlessly in sacrifice. The narcissist, swollen without soul, is also consumed by endless reflection. When they meet, the circuit closes, a cycle of consumption without renewal. Yet when the empath awakens, the cycle breaks. The serpent becomes not destruction, but renewal, a symbol of rebirth. This rebirth is not sudden. It arrives slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. First a dim light, then shapes emerging, then full clarity. You wake one morning and realize you no longer hunger for the narcissist's approval. You no longer bend yourself into contortions to be loved. You stand upright. The spell is broken. The fire that once devoured now reveals its paradox. The power you thought belonged to them was always your own projection, energy you had abandoned. Withdrawn, it returns to you. In analysis, I recall the story of a woman bound to a man who demanded endless praise and gave nothing in return. She believed her soul was broken, yet her dreams showed a great tree, branches spread wide, roots bound in chains. When we traced it, we found her father's conditional love, the earliest chains. The narcissist was the reenactment, the echo of that old wound. But once she saw it clearly, she left. And more than that, she felt her branches grow strong, her roots deepen into freedom. The narcissist had been the vessel, the ferryman across denial, carrying her toward wholeness. Death and rebirth always arrive with paradox. You grieve what is lost, the illusions, the hopes, the years given away. And yet, in that grief, you feel a strange liberation. The tears themselves are initiation, washing the eyes so you can see differently. You realize you cannot return to innocence. You cannot go back to endless giving without discernment. You must carry the lesson forward. This is why the clash matters. Without it, you might never have known your own capacity for fire. Without it, you might still believe endurance was love. The narcissist forces the crisis, but in that crisis, your soul chooses rebirth. Pause with me. Where in your life has a false self died? Where have you felt the terror of saying no, only to discover that the world did not end, that in fact, you were reborn? Share that moment if you can. These stories stitch us together, showing that each descent is not wasted. And if this reflection resonates, subscribe to Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled, so each new descent can be met with shared wisdom rather than silence. The empath who endures the clash steps out changed. No longer prey, no longer savior, but sovereign. They see that love without selfhood is not love. They see that compassion without respect is possession. They see that boundaries are not cruelty, but sacred structure. This is rebirth, yet there is a deeper step still. For the narcissist does not only exist outside, they live within. The mask that craves validation, the hunger for control, the voice that demands you give everything, these are not foreign. They are parts of your own psyche, waiting to be seen, integrated, and transformed. To meet them is to complete the teaching. That is where we now turn, from outer adversary to inner shadow, from clash to integration, from rebirth to sovereignty. The final realization is both unsettling and liberating. The narcissist you fought outside was never only outside. They live within you too. The voice that whispers you must give everything away to be loved. The mask that craves validation, that hungers for control. The subtle pride in being the savior. These inner figures are your own shadow, long denied but endlessly powerful until acknowledged. This is the culmination of the teaching. The outer narcissist was only the messenger, the mirror. Once you withdraw projection, you see them clearly as human, flawed, bound by their own fate. And you see the narcissist within yourself, not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a part to be integrated. I see you, you say to this inner figure. You will not rule me, but I will not deny you either. You are part of me, but you are not the throne. This integration is the heart of individuation. To become whole is not to banish shadow, but to give it a place. You do not fight endless external battles. You turn inward and claim the power you once gave away. The narcissist without becomes powerless because the narcissist within has been named. The pattern ends because the projection dissolves. And when this happens, something extraordinary emerges. Sovereignty. Quiet, steady, not boastful. You no longer confuse sacrifice with love. You no longer collapse into others' needs. You no longer feed the abyss. Instead, you walk with discernment. You offer compassion, but you do not abandon yourself to give it. You love, but you love with a spine. Dreams often celebrate this integration with new symbols. Where once you dreamt of cracked mirrors, you now dream of whole reflections. Where once faceless pursuers haunted you, you now stand tall, unafraid. Where once you handed jewels to strangers, you now discover treasure buried in your own hands. Symbols of renewal, sun breaking through clouds, a child rescued, a jewel uncovered, appear as signs that the psyche has integrated the lesson. At this stage, you may even feel a strange compassion for the narcissist. Not pity, not the compulsion to heal them, but compassion born of clarity. You see their mask of grandiosity hiding a terrified child. You see their endless hunger as the echo of an abyss they cannot face. And yet, you know, it is not your task to rescue them. To bless is not to return. To release is not to reconcile. It is to acknowledge their role in your individuation and then step forward, free. This is the quiet posture of the healer. No longer the one who bleeds to prove worth. No longer the one who saves unconsciously, but one who stands whole, who embodies balance. When you meet another's pain, you do not dissolve in it. You see it, you honor it, but you keep your center. This presence itself is healing, not sacrifice, but wholeness. Pause with me now. Ask yourself, can you feel the narcissist within? The part of you that still craves, still fears emptiness? If so, do not banish it. Acknowledge it. Give it a seat at the table, but not the crown. Share below if you wish. Naming this inner figure aloud loosens its grip. And if this reflection speaks to you, subscribe to Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled, so this conversation of shadows and sovereignty continues in your life. The empath who integrates the inner narcissist becomes something more than empath. They become sovereign. They no longer mirror everyone else's hunger. They no longer vanish in reflection. They hold opposites: light and shadow, compassion and discernment, empathy and selfhood. This is wholeness. This is the birth of sovereignty. And now we arrive at the end of this journey. From labels to archetypes, from wounds to initiation, from death to rebirth, from shadow to sovereignty. We have traveled through storms, through mirrors, through descent and return. And yet, the work does not end here. For every realization must be lived, integrated into choices, relationships, boundaries. This is where the final reflection begins, the 500-word conclusion that carries the lesson into life. The journey you have just walked is not a tidy arc with a ribbon at the end. It is a threshold. When the empath realizes the narcissist was teaching all along, the psyche does not clap its hands and say, "Finished." It whispers instead, "Now live it." For wisdom is not what you hear once. It is what you embody daily, in choices, in boundaries, in the way you love without abandoning yourself. Think back to where we began. The storm in your chest, the ache of giving until you vanished. You mistook endurance for virtue, sacrifice for healing, empathy for love. The narcissist entered not to bless you, but to consume. And yet, by embodying the abyss so fully, they forced you to see what you would not otherwise face: your own silence before your needs, your own hunger for validation, your own terror that love might vanish unless you erased yourself. That confrontation was the crucible. It burned away illusions until you discovered gold, the strength to say no, the clarity to guard your soul, the truth that compassion is not self-destruction. Now you stand at a reversal. Where once you were a mirror for everyone else, now you become your own lantern. Where once you circled endlessly in the Ouroboros of sacrifice, now you walk forward, carrying treasure reclaimed. Where once you descended like Persephone, consumed by shadow, now you return as sovereign of two worlds, able to walk in compassion without dissolving, able to stand in discernment without hardening. This sovereignty is quiet. It does not shout. It does not dominate. It simply exists. Like a tree rooted deeply, branches spread wide. You bless the lesson, not by excusing harm, but by refusing to waste the meaning your soul carved from pain. You bless yourself by promising never again to trade your truth for belonging, never again to hand your jewels away, never again to confuse sacrifice with love. And yet, the teaching is gentle too. Do not close your heart forever. The danger for one who has been wounded is to build walls so high that no one enters again. That is not sovereignty. That is another prison. True wholeness does not extinguish empathy. It roots it. You still feel, you still care, but you do so without abandoning yourself. This balance is the fruit of individuation. So I leave you with this. Choose one boundary to hold in the next 24 hours. Script the sentence. Practice it aloud. Feel your body exhale when you speak it. And tonight, bless yourself with one quiet line, said only for you. I exist. I matter. I begin here. The dragon keeps its fire, but you keep your gold. The storm may return, but you set the weather. The mirror may tempt, but you no longer vanish in it. This is not triumph in the worldly sense. It is deeper. The birth of sovereignty, the awakening of wholeness, the revelation that life itself is woven with paradox, guiding you not toward innocence but toward integration. Carry this truth into your days. Carry it into your choices. Carry it into your voice. And remember, the narcissist was the flame, but you are the gold.